your support of this event. This evening is inspired by a project that was funded by the Florida Humanities, a project called Highway 17 North Heritage Trail, and it's a requirement of the Florida Humanities that they're always acknowledged. It actually was supposed to be on that previous slide, so if anyone from Florida Humanities contacts you, let them know it was there. But the project is to install information kiosks in 3 cities in North Florida: Crescent City, the birthplace of A. Philip Randolph; Green Cove Springs, the birthplace of Augusta Savage; and Jacksonville, the birthplaces of James Weldon and John Rosamond Johnson. And so the plan was conceived by Senator Tony Hill to put up information kiosks and then put posters in the kiosk where people could go to a website and learn more about these people. What you're seeing on screen is the first appearance of these posters. You don't see the Johnson Brothers poster, because this is Jacksonville, and I want you to go and wait to the unveiling and see it for the first time then. But the kiosk is up right now at the Jacksonville Urban League. You can go there today and you can see it's covered in tarp, and we're gonna have an unveiling ceremony and you'll be able to see the Johnson Brothers poster there. But right now, the actual QR codes of these posters work. If you want to get a sneak preview, only Jacksonville History Center members have this opportunity. No one else has seen this. If you want to go and take a look at our website, you can. And you can see, if you go to the Visit All 3 Kiosks page, you can see the kiosk covered in tarp in front of the Jacksonville Urban League, which, by the way, I want to thank Dr. Richard Danford for allowing us to install it there. The Jacksonville Urban League is doing the work that I, as a history professor, and teaching my students have been necessitated by the conditions in our society. So the Jacksonville Urban League is providing solutions to that. Very wonderful. I want to thank Professor Danford. And you might be wondering to yourself, when are we going to have the unveiling ceremony? Honestly, I'm trying to wait for all of the kiosks to be completed, but when Professor Danford says, David, take the tarp off, that's when the tarp's coming off. So when that happens, I'm going to announce it to everyone. You're all going to know about it, and we'll all be able to celebrate it. But this project is celebrating, as it says on here, America's small migrations, these situations in which people of color are moving to, a lot of times, not to the north or to Midwestern cities, but to large African-American dominated cities like Jacksonville was at the time, to see what they can do to grab their slice of the American pie, to whatever opportunity they can. So we're happy to have the opportunity to celebrate one of those people today, Augusta Savage, by one of my students and one of my colleagues, and then another student colleague. The student colleague, her name is Kaysyn Jones. I met her working with the Summer Writing, the African American History Task Force's Summer Writing Institute. She did amazing research on Miss Savage, and she's been an enthusiastic advocate ever since. Right now, she's an honors graduate student at Florida State University, studying creative writing and history with a minor in African American Studies. She's a graduate of the Douglas Anderson School of Arts, where she went on to intern under the DCPS in collaboration with the African American History Writing Institute in 2022, followed by an internship at the Ritz Theater and Museum in 2023. She's currently a member of Sigma Tau Delta Honor Society and an editorial assistant for the Kudzu Review. My student, Eboné Sapp, is a 22-year-old Jacksonville native, currently a student at Edward Waters studying psychology. She has plans of becoming a therapist. She graduated with honors from the Popish House Christian Academy in 2018 and went on to study behavior analysis at Savannah State University. In high school, she had the privilege of serving on Mayor Lenny Curry's Mayor's Youth Leaders Advisory Council. Having lost her stepfather to COVID in 2021 and grandfather cancer in 2022, she's fulfilling her promise to them by continuing her education. She also writes fictional short stories and novels. And last, Dr. Peter Scott Brown is a PhD in history of art from Yale University in 2004, professor of art history at the University of North Florida. His research addresses the history of medieval and early modern art, including problems in monumental art, liturgy and religious ritual, iconography, and the social economic conditions of art patronage and cultural philanthropy. His recent publications examine the legal and judicial significance of beards and baldness in medieval art. And his recent courses explore hyper-local art history that tells the story of art from a standpoint in North Florida through monuments, artworks, and artists that connect to our region. Please welcome Kaysyn Jones, Eboné Sapp, and Dr. Scott Brown.
Hello, everyone, and let me just say, yes, I am Dr. Peter Scott Brown, and this is Kaysyn Jones, and this is Eboné Sapp. I am so pleased to be here today with you and with these two brilliant young people. Let's see. We're here to talk about Augusta Savage. Speaking of anniversaries, 95 years, that's a nice long time. We're roughly 100 years since Augusta Savage broke through in the Harlem Renaissance. She is, let's just begin, a hometown girl. We give a quick biography of Augusta Savage before we get to a conversation with these brilliant young students who are doing current research on Augusta Savage. Augusta Savage is a hometown girl. She was born in Green Cove Springs, right down the way, and grew up there making pots and sculptures out of clay wrested from the banks of the St. John's. And in fact, she's a self-taught artist, and marvelously talented self-taught artist, who, after getting married at the age of 15, having a child just a couple of years later, and having 3 husbands, 2 of whom widowed her by the time she was in her early 30s, moved to West Palm Beach, moved back to Jacksonville to start her career as an artist. And her ambition being, just as you said, David, to move. Green Cove Springs is a very rural place, and West Palm was back in those days too, believe it or not. To move to a city with a big population, with a lot of black people, and she hoped that she could work for them and make a living as an artist. Now this is an interesting question. And I asked her this, David, I wonder if she could make a living here as an artist today. It's always a question. Do you have to move to a bigger city to make it as an artist, as a cultural figure, as someone who needs a bigger market? Well, she did. She couldn't find the clients here in Jacksonville, and she moved to New York, where she became a central figure in the Harlem Renaissance, alongside a number of other Jacksonville expatriates, including James Weldon Johnson, with whom she was very close, and various other figures in the Harlem Renaissance. We'll hear more about that later. She was immediately successful and also immediately frustrated. She won a major competition early on, to a fellowship that would send her to France, and in fact was not able to go because the white participants, some of them from Alabama, resisted the idea that they would go alongside a black person. And so she had to forego her trip. She did eventually make it to France and worked alongside the great French masters of the day. And her comment was, they want to try to change me. And so she ended up learning from them, but working on her own, because she already was a fully formed, mature artist. That was the moment of her great breakthrough. In fact, she began producing in the late 20s and early 30s some extraordinary works, which are tremendously important today. And leading to 1939, her greatest and most important work, 1929, is one of her most famous pieces, Gammon, which is the piece that won her the eventual fellowship to go to France. And then maybe her most famous work, which is the harp, originally entitled Lift Every Voice and Sing, after the James Weldon Johnson song, and was commissioned for the 1939 World's Fair This is a big deal. This was a major piece. She was only one of like 2 women artists in the 1939 World's Fair, and the only black woman. This piece, unfortunately, was destroyed at the end of the fair. And so we know it only through photographs and through small reproductions. But those are perhaps her 2 most famous works. And then the tail end of her career is a story of further frustration. She went from the World's Fair back to Harlem and found the position she had worked in had been taken by someone else. And the rest of her career was spent in a changed landscape. 1940s and 50s were a tough time for women, and they were a tough time for black people. And the reality is that although she continued to work in art, she could no longer work professionally as an artist who supported herself through her. I probably got some of the facts wrong because these guys know better than me. But what we're here today to talk about is the legacy of Augusta Savage. Legacy of Augusta Savage for us, she was a great teacher. And I am a teacher, you're a teacher. What I know as a teacher is that the future are the students that we teach, and then the students that they teach. The legacy and how we keep alive a history that has been forgotten and then rediscovered, and then only now in recent years is being taken seriously in Jacksonville. The question of how we bring that history back is very much the question you're addressing through the work that you're doing, David, and that we're talking about here. These are the people who are going to bring it back and flesh it out, because there's a lot we still don't know about Jacksonville. So I want to turn it over now to Eboné and Kaysyn. And I want to start with, please tell us about your backgrounds. How you discovered Augusta Savage.
Absolutely. So as I said before, I am an alum of the Douglas Anderson School of the Arts. So my first technical exposure to Augusta Savage came in the form of the Augusta Savage Sculpture Garden, which we have at Douglas Anderson. It's an entire outdoor area where there are busts of self-portrait busts of different students, and there's a plaque with her name on the wall, and there is a mountain bust of Augusta Savage herself on the wall. I had no clue who she was. No one mentioned her name, really. No one really talked about her, and I fully assumed that she was just probably a former donor of the school. Because it was an older, weathered bust on that wall, I didn't even know that she was a black woman. I guess she was a woman because her name was Augusta. It was only when I joined the African American History Writing Institute that I actually learned who she was. And that sparked an incredible passion in me for her, because I quickly realized how instrumental she really was to the Harlem Renaissance and to establishing a place for black women artists for years to come. The advances she made as a person and the advances that her students made, the people who came after her, she holds an incredibly pivotal point that many people don't still acknowledge in studies of the Harlem Renaissance, because she was someone who set forth so many standards that we've kind of accepted them as standards to this day. But that was my whole introduction to her, and I'm still learning about her today. I did her bit.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Eboné. I am a junior at Edward Waters University, which is actually where I was introduced to Augusta Savage. I had Dr. Jamison's class. I had him for African American history. I loved the class. We had an art course at the school for the first assignment. However, I am a psychology major, but I am very interested. I did attend the Potter's House in high school. However, not a lot was discussed about the art, especially the art history here in Florida even. You would think that, a small local school would discuss topics like this, especially with predominantly African American students, but I actually learned about her here at Edward Waters, and it was very interesting to me because when you're told about the Harlem Renaissance, you think of like the beautiful poetry, you think of the soul, the music and everything, but I never really was introduced to her until Dr. Jamison came along, and I feel like she has an incredible story. She was told no so many times, but was still so successful. Like, she just persevered through everything. She was so determined and strong-willed. She was a beautiful artist, an great teacher. And from here, I'm just hoping that even through this program, we can just retell her story because she is history. So I just want to more so expose her story and have more people know who she is and what she's done.
To me as a teacher, this is the point that I want to emphasize here. These two talented young people from Jacksonville had to wait until quite late in life to even learn who this person was. This Augusta Savage does belong to us in part, as a part of the history of this region. And what I know as a teacher is that if you expect your students to know something, if you expect people in general to know something, you've got to teach it to them. You can't just expect that they're going to get it through osmosis. And what this tells me is we're not doing a good enough job yet. Not just telling the story of Augusta Savage, but of telling the story of Jacksonville. And that is that's a key problem for a southern city that often has amnesia. And not the only one. But this to me is an important point to drive home. We have a living proof right here that you got to wait until you grow up and go to college to learn this stuff. It shouldn't be the case. This should be a part of our history from the ground up. I want to point out what do we know about Augusta Savage right now? We know actually very little. I'm going to show you a few pictures here, and these are in some sense the most famous works of art by Augusta Savage today. Not because they're necessarily the best ones, but because they're the ones in the most famous museums. All right, so we've got here a portrait of John Henry. Now this is a really interesting one. I want to point out it was acquired in 2011 by the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, one of the richest and most finest museums in the world. But it's not until 2011 that this piece was collected. Another piece in the Museum of Fine Arts acquired in 2007. It's a piece called A Young Boy's beautiful bronze sculpture, but it was not cast until 1994. Augusta Savage didn't cast it because she was dead. What does this tell us? This tells us that these pieces have only become commercially prominent in the art market, only been collected by major museums in recent years. And I want to say here in Jacksonville, a turning point for us was the 2019 exhibition of Augusta Savage's work at the Cumber Museum. That helps us put her back on the map, but it also says something about how we take care of our history, that we have had to wait until now to begin having this conversation seriously. Another work, this is an interesting one at my alma mater at Yale University. It's not in the museum, it's in the Beinecke Library, which is the Rare Books Library, because it's in the James Weldon Johnson papers, which are at Beinecke Library and was given here by James Weldon Johnson's wife, Grace Nail Johnson. So, I want to ask you guys now a more personal question. You talked about your exposure. What do you think, what does Augusta Savage mean to you as a young person from Jacksonville, as a young woman from Jacksonville, as a young black woman from Jacksonville? And how do we share her story with other people who have a claim because they grow up here and they have her as a role model? How do we share that story? What does she mean to you personally?
To me personally, Augusta Savage is a beautiful story of endurance. Her art career only really got started in 1930. In 1921. She was 29 years old when she first got started on her path to becoming a fine artist. We hear a lot about artists who are known prodigies from birth almost, and they have these meteoric risings. But it took her a long time to get started, in part because of the wavering support the people around her had for her. Growing up, she spoke about how she was beaten regularly for making her sculptures. Her father was a pastor and believed that they were graven images that should not be created. She actually lost the ability to make her art at all when she moved to West Palm Beach when she was young. She had a young daughter, she was remarried, she was working. It was only by chance when she met a local potter who took interest in her and gave her clay for free because he saw her excitement over seeing it and thought it so unique that she got back into making art. She then went on to become the first black woman to have a stand at a local fair in West Palm Beach. And at that fair, she was able to win prize money and also met a man who gave her a letter of introduction to the Cooper Union School of Art up in New York City. That was what got her started. She was able to escape her conditions because of the people who supported her. And while she worked incredibly hard, it is almost horrific to think about what would have happened if no one had believed in her, if people had succeeded in crushing the art out of her as a young woman. She tells us how necessary it is to support our young people and support the people around us, to support our artists, and put them on good paths so they can continue making art. If not for Augusta Savage, we would not have had the first contemporary art salon for Black artists. That was Augusta Savage in 1939, same year as her art premiered. She opened the Salon of Contemporary Negro Art, which was the first fine art gallery dedicated to Black artists ever. If that Potter in West Palm Beach had not supported her in that moment, in that spontaneous moment, we would have missed out on one of the key figures of Black art history in this country and even in the world. I think that's the biggest lesson we could ever take away from her, and that's why I still want to keep telling her story today. I mean, what can I say?
Yeah, that was beautifully said. I couldn't say that myself. And I would just add that for me personally, it is I call it a story of no. Because there were so many no's, even from, as she stated, growing up, her father was a preacher. So he's like, hey, we don't do graven images in this household, and that's what that looks like to me. But just from a young age, just the drive and the passion that she had, everyone said no. Everyone said no. There were so many doors closed. Even, she won the competition, and everyone was like, hey, you're not coming to friends with us, babe, sorry. But for her to say, you know what? You're not going to stop me, I will be successful. And it's a shame that we have not spoken more highly of her. It's a shame that more people don't know more about her. And I just think, for me, that is the biggest takeaway, because I am someone who has a lot of hopes and dreams in life. I have a lot of goals and ambitions, and I have had a lot of no's in my life, a lot of no's. But when you finally get that yes and that success from that yes, it just makes it so much. You just appreciate the no. And that's the most thing that I would appreciate from her story.
All right, now I want to ask you something else also about what you guys are working on. Because I know you both have different points of access to Augusta Savage, and you're doing different things in the community and in your studies. So what are you working on now, Augusta Savage?
So in preparation for this talk, I became absolutely fevered with excitement, and I went on a whole new research binge on Augusta Savage. One thing that I found was how often she was mentioned by her students later. It was Jacob Lawrence, who, in my opinion, he's one of my favorites of the Harlem Renaissance. I love his paintings, I love his work. But he credits her with him getting started in art. He was a young man when he met Augusta Savage, and he told a story once about how when he put himself at 16 years old, he walked by this basement window every single day, and he would see Augusta Savage in his basement studio working with clay every single day, and he was enraptured by her. Seeing her work, he would stop and he would stare, and he said it took him so long to have the courage to go inside. And when he went inside, she asked him immediately, "You want to see what I'm doing in here?" And he started staying by there. She taught him how to work with clay. He decided it was not for him. But that was like the start of his art career. She put him on that path, and he credits her with it. Same thing with his wife, Gwendolyn Knight, who he only met because of Augusta Savage. She booked him a job on a mural, and that is where he met his future wife, Gwendolyn Knight. She created the whole bloodline there. Norman Lewis spoke on her so warmly too. He talked about how she showed him that that could be something he could do. He said that he spoke honestly, very frankly, about the difficulty she faced as a Black woman in the town. He said, well, if she's doing it, and she is Black, and she is a woman, and she is having this doubled up on her, and she's still doing this work, what excuse do I have not to do? she was so formative in those lives. And I've been reading about all of this. It's been a bit annoying because so few letters that involve her have been digitized. I've been trawling, but so many, research on her requires travel. You have to go places in order to get some of those documents. I would personally, it's a new aspiration of mine to create a collection of letters that mention her and that she wrote. We don't have a lot of samples of her writing, but I found some, actually in the Jamison Johnson collection that you mentioned. I have letters from Augusta Savage where she's actually asking Grace Nail Johnson to pretty please reach out to the people in the World's Fair because they want to change the name of her statue. She did not want it to be called Park. She was, in fact, very upset about that, but as part of her contract, she had signed over the rights to the name of the statue. And so she asked Grace, because Grace was a socialite, she was part of this upper class, she was upper crust, and she asked her if she could speak on her behalf, because they might listen to her better because she was a refined Harlem woman, which did not work. But all that information is stuff that goes overlooked that not many people know about because there is no really formal collection of stuff that she's been saying, which is endlessly kind of upsetting to me. And I would personally love to be the one who puts together that sort of thing so future scholars have access to a collection that shows her as a person and how she existed as a person.
To answer the question, I feel like from now, what's now? Just tell her story. As a short story artist, I love even incorporating real life stories into my own stories. So of course, I've been working closely with the Potter's House, which is where I graduated from. I've been working with the Dean of Students. He's very excited. I feel like start there. Start in high school. Start in middle school, elementary. Let everybody know who she is. And even just the other people surrounding her, because she has a lot of big names backing her. A lot of big names. And from this point, we just have to get the word out. And as you guys can see, I have the best team of researchers on my side. So from here, it's not what's next, it's like how do we get it done? Let's get it done, and how do we go about doing it? And that's what I'm really excited for moving forward.
You can see we've got the scholar and the community activist here. We got, you're going to publish the book of Augusta Savage's papers. Kaysyn's been doing all this archival work, and you don't know, I mean, this stuff is amazing. These archives are full of unpublished, handwritten letters, notes, the documents that record a life, an existence, its frustrations and its triumphs. It's out there, and as you say, we don't have access to it. That's part of the reason we have trouble telling our story, is that we don't yet know the story. And then there's the question of how we get out there and do it. That once you do the scholarship, then you gotta have a message. And you gotta have the outlets in the schools, you gotta have the outlets in the community. And I love the two of you. It's teamwork. This leads us to the next question. What do we still not know about Augusta Savage? And it's a lot. It's a lot. I'm going to show you a few pictures here because, as I say, there are some pieces in famous museum collections now, but a lot of Augusta Savage's work is lost. And we know it only through documentary records or through photographs. Now, lost doesn't mean necessarily gone. It may be out there somewhere. But part of the challenge for a figure like Augusta Savage is bringing them back from the brink of oblivion, of finding the people who do know and still have things. And I'm just going to show you here some of the extraordinary things. Of course, we have photographs of her casts and models. And this is not even the finished harp sculpture. These are studies, prototypes that she's working on. Some of this may still be out there somewhere, believe it or not. This is a fascinating sculpture. We don't even know the type. Do you?
Realization.
Realization.
Nice.
It is a work that is unlocated. It may still exist, who knows? This one I love. Pumbaa, which is a Zulu, right? Swahili, which means reckless, wild. Of course, famously, it's the name of the warthog in The Lion King. But I love this sculpture because it is this reckless so different from her normal sculpture. Her normal sculpture, much of what we know about her sculpture is really representational. It is the best, like, realist sculpture that you could possibly think of. But she's playing here. She's having fun. And this is a very free, very modernist kind of art. We don't know where it is, but there's a photograph of it in the New York Public Library. This is such an amazing picture. There's a person in this sculpture. You can feel the clay, you can both feel the sculptor's hands, and you can feel the personality, the real person that she's sculpting. All of these works are lost, unlocated. Some of them, again, may emerge. They may be out there. But there's a lot we don't know about Augusta Savage, both the archival stuff we were talking about, and about her as an artist, her as a creative. I'm interested in that. What do we not know about Augusta Savage? We can say there's one in the academic world, what we don't know, and then at the national level, there's what we don't know, and then there's here in Jacksonville. What do we not know? The work we're talking about here tonight is about addressing those gaps. What do you think? What are the biggest areas in terms of sharing the details of her life, in terms of reaching out in schools? What are the biggest areas where we just don't know enough about Augusta Savage in terms of what it means to grow up in Jacksonville?
Absolutely. One of the biggest, I guess, heart-rending things about her is that we know that she was a letter writer. She wrote a lot of different notes to people, even very informal ones. I found one of her writing to Harlem Renaissance writer Dorothy West, thanking her for spotting her some money because she was having a rough month when she was living in Harlem. We know that she wrote these even informal notes to people. She hand-wrote invitations to her art galleries and mailed them out to her friends. And we know it's because they're in her friends' galleries and in their archives. But what's kind of frustrating is that she died in 1962 in the house of her daughter, Irene Connie Moore. Irene Connie Moore, according to census records, lived in about the same place until her death in 1986. And I'm assuming that she had those letters. She had the letters she'd exchanged with her mother. She had the letters that her mother would have carried along with her. But because no one in 1986 cared enough about Augusta Savage, it's entirely likely that after Irene Connie Moore died, those letters were thrown away. They very likely don't exist anymore. They are not in record anywhere, and that's a massive blank spot in what we know about her. I'll also say that I feel like there's a gap in scholarship on all levels when it comes to her. I feel like there's not been enough investigation onto her as a person. How she interacted with people, her personality, what she represented in the historic sense. I feel something that has gone horribly unexplored. But also directly on the level of, we talked about on the high school level and stuff. It's kind of ridiculous that I did not know who she was when I went to a school with a sculpture garden named after her. It was an entire sculpture garden. I walked by that name every single day for 4 straight years, and it was only my junior year that I learned who she was as a person. That's insane. I think that we need to have a much bigger focus on local history that we're teaching in our schools, especially in schools that have art programs. So many, if you don't know where you've been, you don't know where you're going. I can't imagine how many students could have thrived off of knowing that there was this beautiful woman almost 100 years ago who was active, who was an artist, who was a trailblazer, and who worked so hard so people like them could succeed. Knowing about her would bring an immense amount of cultural, emotional, and artistic value, but she's not really in the curriculum. We've started putting her in the curriculum, but I don't know if that's enough right now. I think that we need to have her be more firmly integrated into what we learn as students.
All right.
I 1,000% agree. There does need to be more focus on who she was. Not just we know her as the sculptor, we know her as the artist, we know her somewhat from her writings, but do we really know who she was? Like how, for me, I love thinking of people from a psychological standpoint. How did all of this affect her everyday life? like yes, we see that she was still clearly a successful artist in her own right, but how did she take rejection? How did she handle that? How did she create so many lasting relationships with people? And I feel like that's a really huge part that we need to understand and get to understand who she is, because that is very important in understanding anyone.
If I could speak to that real quick, one of my favorite examples of the writing that we have is from 1923. It was in response to her being denied from the Fontainebleau School of Arts in Paris, France. She actually sent in a letter, I believe it was to the Chicago Defender, where she explained how she was feeling about it. And one thing that she explicitly said was her brother was allowed to go over to France, to Paris, to fight in a war, but she was not allowed to go there to make art. And she asked why her situation had to be so different. He got a free ride to Paris to go die in someone's war, but she couldn't go to practice sculpture. And I feel like that's it's an insight into who she was outside of this almost maternal figure, outside of this educator, outside of this trailblazer. She was a woman with frustrations. She was annoyed. She had passion and drive, and like you said, there were no's in her way, and she acknowledged it, and she was mad about that, and she should have been. Looking at her from that perspective is definitely something we need to see more of, 100%.
It is awesome. I love this exchange. And the points you're making are so important. It's great to have heroes, okay? But the problem with heroes is that if we don't really understand them and their complexity, and we risk just flattening into superficial figures and putting pasting a picture on the wall and saying, okay, we're good. Augusta Savage is more complex than that, and she has a bigger story, especially for us. One of the things I'd like to know is, what does she think about Jacksonville? That's something that we ought to be thinking about, and we ought to try to interpret for our kids. It's great to have heroes, and it's great that this hometown girl accomplished what she did. But on the other hand, there's a story to be told about us that's still relevant, it's still important. What did she mean to Jacksonville, and how did all those no's shape her activism? Because I know one of the things that you both pointed out is that she wasn't just an artist.
Yeah, she wrote. She retired in 1945. She left Harlem and retired to more upstate New York area. And there, she did still make some art. She actually taught sculpture at summer camps up there. But something that I found absolutely fascinating, she started writing short stories. She started writing murder mysteries. She wrote children's books. Apparently she even wrote poetry. A lot of people tend to frame an artist's retirement as them almost giving up on the art world. I think that we kind of venerate this idea of an artist who just continues to the end. But I find it so fascinating and so delightful that she was 53 when she retired. She chose to explore new avenues of her life. She learned about creativity in another way, and this was while she was doing this part-time because her primary occupation in upstate New York was working as a mushroom farmer. She worked as a farmer, then taught sculpture. Then she went and wrote her mystery novels in her house. Like, that's delightful to me. I think it's nice to have this reminder that she was also a retired woman who lived a quiet life, but also loved a good whodunit, who liked writing stories for children to share with people.
All right, Kaysyn, is that why you're wearing that shirt with mushrooms on it?
It might be.
Everything's been said. Wow. Yeah, even from Kaysyn personally, I have learned so much about Augusta Savage. Like when I tell you, if you ever need somebody to really get into research, you know it's right here. And she tells the story so beautifully. She really digs into her research and gets to the point of who Augusta Savage is. And I love that because for anyone, I feel like they're more than just their occupation. Who is she as a person? We have very little to go on. And that's definitely something that we need to further research about her because she had such a full life. Like even working at a mushroom farm, she still pursued her passions. Even if it was just privately, she still kept going. She never gave up. And that is so important because a lot of people Even speaking for myself, I used to be someone who would give up easily. If I didn't get it the first time, don't worry about it. I'm not going to cry about it, but I'm going to cry. You know? It's just important that we share the story of people who persevered, who worked through it, and even after her whole life not really being acknowledged like she should. She deserves so much more, so much more. And even through that, she kept going, and that is so important.
Adding on to that, like her multidimensionality, it's really part of the reason why she left Harlem was because she was being stalked. Like that, starting around 1923 also, she, at a poetry reading, she met a man named Joe Gold, who today he's surprised, he's not super well known, but he's known as like an American eccentric. He was a Harvard graduate, but also he was a violent, deranged stalker who chased her across like New York for 22 years.
This is true.
No one talks about it. She went to the police on multiple occasions. They did not listen to her, and they completely ignored it.
And he was a white man, and she was a black woman.
Exactly. He claimed many times that he was writing the longest book in history, and for a long time he believed that he was totally lying about it. No, apparently he was writing it because he would send excerpts to Augusta Savage, which ended up being hundreds of pages of a lunatic's obsession with her. Part of why she had to retire was for her own physical safety as a person. She was somebody who was victimized even on that level. Even being, she was pretty respected.
A lot of this writing is just her name over and over again. Shades of the Shining.
Yeah, but people don't discuss that aspect of it, and I think it's a reminder of it.
And to Eboné's point, it's this humanizing, the psychological humanizing of people, rather than the flattening of people. History is so challenging. One, just knowing the facts is hard, okay? But two, giving reality to those facts, giving them substance. David and I, as historians, we know this because making it something that happened in the past alive for our students is a challenge. But it's a challenge we need to face up to when we're talking about interpreting our own history. I'd love to know what Augusta thought about Jacksonville itself. In 1939, she came back to town. And it's then that the famous sculpture in the Cummer Museum, the Diving Boy, entered the collection. There's a lot of mystery about how it got in there. Some people say that she gave it to Nina Cummer. Some, that doesn't seem plausible to me. The most likely thing seems to be that Nina Cummer would have bought it. But I'd love to know what that exchange was like. What does it mean to come back to your hometown at this moment in your career? What's your perspective on Jacksonville? At a time in Jacksonville's history, man, it was not easy to come back from Harlem to Jacksonville in 1939.
Absolutely. Lending insight into that, we know that at the time, Augusta Savage was a bit of a nationalist. She was a big fan of Marcus Garvey. In fact, her third husband was a man who worked under Garvey. They were married for only a few months before he died of pneumonia, unfortunately. But she was very much a race woman. That was something she presented herself very strongly as. And she also needed money. I don't know if she would have just donated one of her works to someone just like that. I think it's more likely that it was a regular transaction, but this kind of, myth of benevolence that exists around the Diving Boy's arrival to the Cummer Museum is interesting. Why is it something that would have been asserted at any point that this would have been something that happened out of friendship as opposed to a business transaction? It's very fascinating to me.
So I want to conclude with a few more pictures and a couple more questions about Augusta's works. Two themes here. One, she made a lot of images of young black children as a dominant theme in her work, as we can see here, of young boys and girls, especially a lot of young boys. Her ambition was to cast these sculptures in bronze, and I just want to point out bronze is an elite medium we associate with kings, right? And so using this art form to make pictures of young children who have no special importance in the world, who are basically anonymous, that's unusual. And then children we think of as vulnerable, and bronze is this hard, very durable medium. It's really interesting. I'd like to have, maybe start with Eboné to talk about, again, the psychological ramifications. What do you think her interest in children as a subject in these works. Any thoughts about Augusta Savage's psychology as an artist?
I would say, of course, from a psychological standpoint, children, mainly adolescents, when they go through like a harsh trauma, maybe the trauma of her father beating her for her passion, or being denied her passion, really speaks to how much she does encapsulate the young Black child. Because for a lot of people, especially artists, their art is about their struggle. Their art mainly is about sometimes what hurt them. So maybe, I would love to ask her, but maybe it was more so her inner child coming out through her art. I really believe that, because seeing how many young Black children she sculpted beautifully, perfectly, and then to use bronze as the medium. Maybe she was telling her inner child that she was worth bronze. She never got a chance to explore that as a child. So that's something very interesting that I would really have to think about.
And one last thought here. I just want to conclude with Augusta Savage's students, which you guys brought up. I just want to show you a couple more pictures. We've got Gwendolyn Knight. This is Augusta's sculpture of her student, Gwendolyn Knight, who went on to become one of the greatest African-American artists, one of the greatest artists of the 20th century. Gwendolyn Knight is a huge artist. And this is one of her late works, Diva. And another, here in the Cover Museum, William Artis, another magnificent artist. And one of the great abstract expressionists of the 20th century. This is Norman Lewis, a fantasy, too. And then Jacob Lawrence, who you mentioned. And finally, we'll end with here this really beautiful picture of Robert Blackburn, the girl in red, 1952. But one point we want to emphasize here in Women's History Month is Augusta has a nurturer. Augusta, as you pointed out several times, both her influence on people's lives, saying yes instead of no, to people who went on and carried this legacy into the future. Just as I'm going to say to you now, yes. Go forth and do your work.